gap of 7.5% between long term and short term. So 12.5 and 20. So still, if you are a long term investor, you have a lower tax rate by 7.5%. So this is actually within the range in which the market was speculating. And one more thing which the market was speculating, that the definition of long term and short term would change from 1 year to a higher number, which did not happen. So this is within what the market was speculating.
Okay, wasn't there the hope that the LTCG exemption on shares, equity, wasn't the industry hoping for an exemption on shares and equity post 3 years?
No, it wouldn't be, because the world over there is no exemption, and world over there is a taxation on listed security, and the rates are very comparable. So I don't think anybody was expecting 10 to become 0. They were fearing that 10 could become maybe 15 or 20 and it's 12.5.
Okay. How do you view, keeping it with mutual funds and market-linked investments, how do you view the TDS decision from the budget?
It's a relief, actually. It's a relief. Lesser compliance.
Okay.
Relief. But really, we have to read the fine print. We just have heard a speech and we're just giving this interview.
Right.
We should read the fine print and then discuss it again. But prima facie it appears. And see, decriminalization of a lot of offences, decriminalization of TDS, there are lots of good stuff spoken about to really help. But let's read the fine print and then come up to it.
Right. Mr. Vanwari, you also mentioned about angel tax. I want to just spend a minute with you before we let you go on angel tax. Angel tax has been abolished. This was pretty much, something that that we had also reported, and a lot of news agencies had reported that a rethink in angel tax is, is likely to happen in the budget. That has finally happened. What sort of relief do you think this is likely to bring to investments into startups coming into India from outside?
For the future, yes, but what I'm worried about is that if angel tax is abolished, say from April 1, 2024, what happens to the past? So really, going forward looks to be a big relief, but what happens to the past is really something which we have to see the amendment and see.
Okay, forget.
We'll just, Mr. Rungta, we'll bring you back into this conversation in just a bit. If you can just help us, mathematically calculate. I'm sure you're scribbling something. If you can just calculate exactly what would be the tax liability now in the new tax regime with the changes on people earning 7 lakh rupees, 8 lakh rupees, 9 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees, 11 lakh rupees and 12 lakh rupees. So those 6 salary brackets all the way from 7 lakh rupees going up to 12 lakh rupees. If you can just create this for us, we'll give you a minute and let's speak to Lloyd till then on angel tax.
Right, Lloyd, you deal with so many startups across the country. You think that finally they're like big relief for India's startup ecosystem?
I think it's a good sign. I think it was expected for a while now. So I think that's certainly one good sign, given the fact that the whole startup ecosystem hasn't had much great news to celebrate over the last 2 years. Right, things have been down. So I think that's certainly positive. Though I'd still wish that a couple of other elements were spoken specifically to startups. While the finance minister did address MSMEs in a very significant manner, I think this was a good soft signaling to the startup sector.
All right, okay. So a good news, something which was in line with expectation, of course, as far as angel tax is concerned.
Minister literally started right at the top of her speech by highlighting, some of the things we've been working on and contributing on, like working women hostels and establishing creches. I mean, the childcare infrastructure investments that we've been advocating for right. years, finally coming in the finance minister's speech is very exciting for us personally at Nicor Associates. And of course, the second big takeaway really for me, cities as engines of growth. I mean, this is a line I've used in a number of my policy briefs. So just to see it, in the finance minister's speech was also again very exciting, and her prioritizing 14 cities for transit-oriented development, linking back to our discussion in the morning of, talking not only about affordable housing, but like cities which are easy to navigate, again being prioritized. Then, of course, a third aspect around MSMEs, and the fact that MSMEs are really at the core of this budget as job creators. And the fourth one being youth employment. I mean, this internship scheme, I am dying to take advantage of it because, I'll go there and say, I'm hiring, 25 interns a month. Please, as a startup, as an employer, I could also benefit from it. So it's very exciting. And of course, the youth will benefit from it. And I think the fifth one really for me was climate resilience as a key theme, coming in a number of infrastructure areas like the irrigation fund and the flood control fund, and looking very clearly at irrigation and flood control. But the sixth bonus point which I'd like to mention is again something we were discussing in the morning about Andhra Pradesh and Bihar, right? And the fact that we did expect a lot of the prioritization to come in through sectoral interventions, and the highways in Bihar, the flood management in Bihar, the new capital city in Andhra Pradesh, agriculture in across different states, and of course special packages for the hill states, and the development there, tourism also. These are really good directions for us to go in.
All right, well, good direction to go in, and as we progress, as we discuss all facets of budget, let's quickly listen into what Finance Minister said on tax slabs particularly. What are the changes in the new tax regime?
I have two announcements to make for those opting for the new tax regime. First, the standard deduction for salaried employees is proposed to be increased from 50,000 to 75,000 rupees. Similarly, deduction on family pension for pensioners is proposed to be enhanced from 15,000 to 25,000 rupees. This will provide relief to about 4 crore salaried individuals and pensioners. Second, in the new tax regime, the tax rate structure is proposed to be revised as follows: 0 to 3 lakh rupees, nil; 3 to 7 lakh rupees, 5%; 7 to 10 lakh rupees, 10%; 10 to 12 lakh rupees, 15%; 12 to 15 lakh rupees, 20%; and above 15 lakh rupees, 30%. As a result of these changes, a salaried employee in the new tax regime stands to save up to 17,500 rupees in income tax. Apart from these, I am also making some other changes as given in the annexure. As a result of these proposals, revenue of about 37,000 crore, that is 29,000 crore in direct taxes and 8,000 crore in indirect taxes, will be foregone, while revenue of about 30,000 crore rupees will be additionally mobilized. Thus, the total revenue foregone is about 7,000 crores annually.
That's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman explaining the changes that have been made to the new tax regime, the slabs of the new tax regime. We have Mr. Saurabh Agarwal, tax partner at EY India, now joining us on the broadcast as well. Saurabh, thank you so much for taking time out. 17,500 rupees is the amount calculated by the Finance Minister. Do you think that's doing enough for India's middle class, which had high expectations from Budget 2024?
I think the expectation was that the tax rebates will be somewhere in the range of 15,000 to 20,000. So while it may not be meeting the expectations of the Indian middle class, but if you look at the way the economy functions, I think 17,500 rebate on the overall basis, I think that was the likely expectation. We were not expecting much to come around from the budget.
Okay, Harshvardhan Rungta is also with us. He's joined us back. Harsh, you've made your calculations, haven't you, regarding what these new tax slabs are and what it will mean, and in terms of the money left with us?
Yeah, so these are just very rough calculations at short notice, so there are bound to be some errors. But anyways, if you were, I'm assuming that the rebate for income up to 7 lakhs is still available. So all the income that you have up to 7 lakhs will be tax exempt. Let's take a case of a person earning 8 lakh of rupees. Now, I have not included the increment in standard deduction. So this is purely leaving the standard deduction away. And if you were just to calculate the tax based on the tax slabs, so for the moment, I have not included the tax, the standard deduction. So if you're earning 8 lakh of rupees, the existing tax that you would have paid would be approximately 35,000 rupees. And the revised slab, now your tax liability comes down to 30,000 rupees. So there's a savings of approximately 5,000. Plus, you add the standard deduction benefit that you will get. So, for the moment, as I said, I've not included the standard deduction for simplicity of calculation, purely on the slab that has been announced. If you're earning a 9 lakh of rupees, the existing tax that you would have paid would be 45,000, which now becomes 40,000. So there continues to be a benefit of 5,000 rupees for people who are earning up to 9 lakhs. If your income is 10 lakhs, then the savings that you make, so in existing slabs, you're required to be paying about 60,000 rupees as tax, which will come down to 50,000 in the revised slab. So there's going to be a 10,000 rupees benefit if your income is up to 10 lakhs, and if it's 11 lakhs, then the continuation is there for 10,000 rupees as a difference, because the existing tax would be 75,000, the revised would be 65,000. Now, if you club that increment benefit of the standard deduction and you're in the 30% bracket, then there is an additional 7,500 rupees that you save. So that's where the calculation of the finance minister comes saying 10,000 rupees is the benefit that you get when you switch with the new slabs that have been announced in this budget, and the 7,500 that you will save in addition on account of the standard deductions going up. So that's the 17,000 kind of a calculation that's been referred to.
Krishna, I have one observation here, and Harsh, I don't know, if you'll agree with me or not, but if you're allocating or sort of, averaging the 17,000 rupees saving across each of the tax slabs, then 17,000 on somebody who is earning 7 lakh rupees is just about 2.5% of the salary, whereas for somebody who's earning about 12 lakh rupees, it's about 1.4% of the salary. Both these don't beat inflation. So Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has given an increment to people earning up to 12 lakh rupees, but an increment that doesn't beat inflation.
Well, the tax slabs would never be aligned in such a way that you could beat inflation completely. I mean, this is only an incentive, and the government says that this is going to still burn a hole into the tax collections. But I guess whatever relief that can be given in the budget has been proposed. Yes, of course, there is going to be always a debate on this point that of inflation or not. So there's not much we can do at this juncture, but just to kind of hope. And in fact, I mean, we've not still calculated the other additional tax burden that we will have on ourselves in the form of increased capital gains. So that part is still awaited.
So Krishna, my fear is that the tax incentive which has been offered by Finance Minister is actually going to do little to nothing in really boosting consumption. I don't know, I mean, Mithali, if you'll agree with me or not, but I mean, I don't see a massive tilt towards consumption, and hence FMCG is going to stay in stress. There's been absolutely nothing on the auto sector. So it doesn't seem to me like right now, at least, as a consumption-oriented budget.
I'm very certain there will be something about auto sector, at least in the fine print of the budget. So maybe not a part of the speech, but we're still hoping and waiting for the fine print of the budget. But that 17,500 annually is not going to do much.
For consumption, so at the end of the day, when we look at India is always known as a consumption-driven economy. We've always been an economy where we've said, okay, investment, sure, but consumption is really our GDP's growth driver. Of course, 17,500 rupees per year on an average for a middle income person does little for consumption, over an annual basis. But again, when we look at the relief that comes in for the class of between 3 to 7 lakhs, and the fact that, a person earning 6 lakhs to 7 lakhs, that's the person that's really benefiting. Now, of course, that's a smaller category of people, but there are certain people who will benefit out of it. But I completely agree with Karthik that overall, when we look at a macro impact on consumption, that's not really coming through.
Just let's also quickly listen in on as far as the income front is concerned, the tax rebates on the TDS rebate on mutual funds as well, and then we'll continue this conversation.
We will continue our efforts to simplify taxes, improve taxpayer services, provide tax certainty, and reduce litigation while enhancing revenues for funding the development and welfare schemes of the government. It has been our endeavor to simplify taxation. We have taken a number of measures in the last few years, including introduction of simplified tax regimes without exemptions and deductions for corporate tax and for personal income tax. This has been appreciated by taxpayers. 58% of corporate tax came from the simplified tax regime in the financial year 22-23. Similarly, as per data available till now, for the last fiscal, more than 2/3 have availed the new personal income tax regime. Comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act. I am now announcing a comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act 1961. The purpose is to make the Act concise, lucid, easy to read and understand. This will reduce disputes and litigation, thereby providing tax certainty to the taxpayers. I will also bring down the demand embroiled in litigation. It is proposed to be completed in 6 months. A beginning is being made in the finance bill by simplifying the tax regime for charities, tedious rate structures, provisions of reassessment and such provisions, and capital gains taxation. Simplification for charities and tedious. Two tax exemption regimes. The two tax exemption regimes for charities are proposed to be merged into one. The 5% TDS rate on many payments is being merged into the 2% TDS rate, and the 20% TDS rate on repurchase of units by mutual funds or UTI is being withdrawn. TDS rate on e-commerce operators is proposed to be reduced from 1 to 0.1%. Moreover, credit of TCS is proposed to be given in the TDS to be deducted on salary. Further, I propose to decriminalize delay for payment of TDS up to the due date of filing statement for the same. I also plan to provide a standard operating procedure for TDS defaults and simplify and rationalize the compounding guidelines for such defaults. Simplification of reassessment. I propose to thoroughly simplify the provisions for reopening and reassessment. An assessment hereinafter can be reopened beyond 3 years from the end of the assessment year only if the escaped income is 50 lakh rupees or more, up to a maximum period of 5 years from the end of the assessment year. Even in such cases, a time limit of 6 years before the year of the search, as against the existing time limit of 10 years, is being proposed. This will reduce tax uncertainty and disputes. Simplification and rationalization of capital gains. Capital gains taxation is also proposed to be hugely simplified. Short-term gains on certain financial assets shall henceforth attract a tax rate of 20%, while that on all other financial assets and all non-financial assets shall continue to attract the applicable tax rate. Long-term gains on all financial and non-financial assets, on the other hand, will attract a tax rate of 12.5%. For the benefit of the lower and the middle income classes, I propose to increase the limit of exemption of capital gains on certain financial assets to 1.25 lakh rupees per year. Listed financial assets held for more than a year will be classified as long-term, while unlisted financial assets and all non-financial assets will have to be held for at least 2 years to be classified as long-term. Unlisted bonds and debentures, debt mutual funds, and market-linked debentures, irrespective of holding period, however, will attract tax on capital gains at applicable rates. Taxpayer services. All the major taxpayer services under GST.
That's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman explaining the changes made to the taxation on investments. I'm going to check with Saurabh on this. Saurabh, talk to us. How do you view three things? One is the change in the LTCG and the STCG, or long-term capital gains tax, or the short-term capital gains tax regime. And more importantly, the regime being done away with, the 20% TDS on mutual funds.
Points. Of late, post-COVID, what we have seen is that a lot of retail investors are entering into the stock market. Of course, if you see the number of retail investors who have entered the stock market today are by far less compared to any of the developed economies. I think what the FM is trying to do is FM is trying to incentivize by way of increasing the exemption limit on the capital gains on the financial assets, which is a welcome part, which will ensure that at least there's some bit of relief and people will more invest into the stock markets, at least on the retail investor side. I think when you look at the fact that the way they are now ensuring that the long-term capital gain, they are moving it to 12.5%. That is somewhere you will see that there will be a hitch which will come 10 to 12.5%, which will be an increased taxation over there. So there, that will be something which the people were not expecting. On the mutual fund TDS, I think that's something which has to be looked into as to how people will look into, because that's only a TDS part. It's maybe a cash flow issue for the investor, but overall the taxability remains as such.
All right, Saurabh Agarwal there, tax partner TY India, helping us understand what the changes in taxation means. We have Suyash Maheshwari also now quickly joining us. Suyash, thank you for being with us. Before we start talking, let me also bring in Mr. Feroz Aziz, who joins us on the broadcast on Budget Day. Feroz, always a pleasure chatting with you. Great to have you here with us on Budget Day. From what I understand, the markets are recovering post the budget speech. But how do you view the taxation on investments that we're just talking about, be it the increase in the LTCG or the doing away with of TDS on mutual funds?
Yes, so I think I'm reasonably positive. See, I've been talking about capital gain simplification for the last 2 years. I think simplification, the key point is all assets have been brought to 12.5%, which is a big move. Because it says financial and non-financial assets. All of them have been brought to 12.5% in the long term. The only difference remains between the long-term categorization after 1 year or 2 years. So the simplification need which capital gain had on both counts has been satisfied. One is on the tax rate for real estate, for gold, for equity. All of it is unlisted equity, private markets, all of it at 12.5%. The only difference is 1 year and 2 year for non-financial assets. That's a very, very big change, and I think that's a huge simplification. Second, earlier there were different time periods for them to become long-term. Now all of them become long-term in the same time period. Unlisted equity was 2 years and real estate was 2 years, but there were some debt instruments which were 3 years. And gold was 3 years. So all of them become 2 year plus. So I think simplification on tax rate and the period to get to long term is a big, big move. Now what can happen is real estate can have a large impact, because earlier real estate used to have a taxation of 20% plus. So people used to use the benefit of Section 54 to reinvest into property. But if there is somebody having to pay only 12.5% tax, he may not reinvest the money back into property. So it is a double-edged sword, or it could also be construed as positive or negative for real estate, because real estate always had this engine of reinvestment because of Section 54, which was capped at 10 crores a couple of budgets back. So I think it's a big, big move on the capital gain head, and I think I'm reasonably positive. Second, I think Section 50AA, which was included in February 2023, brought into some degree of tax disadvantage for fund of funds, inadvertently. That has now been clarified. So if you look at the finance bill, it very clearly says Section 50AA now has been reversed in the language. Instead of 35% in equity, which was the mandate to be out of this gamut, now they've said if there is more than 65% in money market and debt instruments, it will be covered under Section 50AA. So that's a great news for the mutual fund industry, where fund of funds inadvertently had got covered into Section 50AA, and that has been corrected. So these are some major changes for the mutual fund industry and the investment arena. But I think the simplification need, which I have been highlighting for years, has been done to a 80-90% extent, which I would expect.
All right, Feroz, stay with us. We also have Mohit Gang now joining us on the broadcast as well. Mohit, thank you so much for taking time out with us to be with us here on Budget Day. We're just going to come to you, but Suyash, first, why don't you give us a heads up on how the markets are trading at this point in time?
Certainly, Krishna, and as just Feroz pointed out, the initial reaction, the market did not like the hike on SGCG and the STT on futures and the security transaction tax on futures and options, which was hiked to 0.02% for your futures contracts and by 0.1% for your options contracts. So I think the initial knee-jerk reaction was negative. The markets did correct, and we saw a fall of about 1% for the headliners and about 1.5 to 2% for the mid-cap and the small-cap stocks. But since then, we have seen a good bit of recovery. Nifty currently is down by about 0.5%. It has in fact managed to move past 24,350 mark. Volatility index has declined significantly. It's down by 11.5%. It's back below that 14 sort of levels. The small cap and mid cap indices both have paired losses as well. Both are down about 1% as well. And when it comes to sectors, the FMCG sector is doing well as it was doing in the morning. It's up about 2%. All other sectors, barring a couple, pharma and your realty, your defensive sectors, apart from that, all are trading in the red, but we are seeing some recovery as the day goes by. For example, Nifty Bank, which took a hit of about 2.5%, is now down about 1.25%.
So basically, markets in recovery mode after the budget speech announcement, after dipping much lower, they're all on recovery mode. Mohit, the volatility was expected as far as budget day trading is concerned. How do you read the moves of the markets this morning or this afternoon so far?
Look, I think the market is more reacting to the capital gain part of it. And honestly, there is not too much clarity as to what is the effective date of applicability. My understanding is it's effective today, which is 23rd of July, the taxation bit, which is the short-term and the long-term capital gains part. And honestly, I think perhaps maybe to that reaction, people or investors in the market were just trying to book some profit out. Right, possibly trying and booking the short-term gains out and thinking that they can just apply the earlier slabs and just have it booked and then again buy the dip. So that just explains me what has happened in the morning. One big cut where some amount of selling happened and then perhaps buying again in the market. But otherwise, it's very difficult to explain as to what the market is reacting to right now.
Okay.
And Mohit, I want to come to you on the, we were talking about how FNO, like there could be some curbs imposed by the FM on FNO is concerned. Now, they have hiked the SGCG, the short-term capital gain tax from 15 to 20%, and STT, security transaction tax, has also been hiked on both futures and options. How big a deterrent is that going to be, Mohit, in your opinion?
Look, honestly, Suyash, if the country has got hooked onto trading as a means of income, it is very difficult to push the people out by just increasing tax rates. Honestly, that's my firm belief. Though you might just people pay taxes on gains, right? And if they were earning some money, they might just not want to increasing the STT or maybe the transactions. Perhaps it's not the gain amount out here which is getting taxed, but the transaction amount. Maybe the thresholds increase a little. My sense is the financial regulator, which is SEBI, will work in tandem with the government. Government out here in the budget has outlaid some amount of taxes which they have increased, which is the STT and perhaps the long-term and the short-term capital gains tax. But my sense is SEBI might just come a little hard on this and increase the lot sizes. The combined effect of these two entities coming together and trying to curb the speculative activity in the market or the FNO activity in the market might become slightly substantial. As of now, honestly, increasing the STT alone, will it reduce the volumes? I honestly doubt that. Long-term capital gain tax increasing to me is a little sad. Otherwise, I'm not very disappointed with the overall tax changes. But the long-term capital gain, I think in some way you're trying to discourage long-term investors or long-term savers in the country. Short-term, I think it's a good measure, perhaps trying to equate all the financial assets at one go, which I think was the need of the hour, because there were different types of taxes applicable on different types of financial assets. Plus the holding period was also different if you were listed, unlisted. So I think some amount of parity was warranted out there. So that's a good measure. But long-term capital gains getting increased, I think is never good for savers of financial assets.
Right. Mohit, stay with us. Let me take this across to Feroz Aziz. Feroz, talk to us, post this budget, how do you view the sectors to invest in? Where should, people realign their portfolios going forward? If you can unmute yourself, Feroz.
Before going to the sectors, let me touch upon the broader market. I think the broader market rally could remain intact because there's no bad news there. That's very, very important because it's not just about the sectorial differential performance. The relative performance of the broader market, which is the small cap and the mid cap space with Nifty, has been reasonably divergent, almost about a 35% difference between these indices you see in about a year and a quarter. So that was one risk we were sitting on. If there was something which could actually burst that bubble. Bubble is a strong word, bubble in the sense higher valuations or more than 2 sigma, more than mean P's, which you see in the mid cap and small cap space today, that remains intact. There's no panic there. Point two, I think the capital expenditure has been kept intact. So before and after the budget, I think whatever was the opinion after the interim budget remains the same now. I would say the banking sector will get some push because debt, most of the debt instruments have been brought to parity with deposits. So that could actually improve deposits growth. That's point one. So the banking sector, which is the reasonable valuation, almost 27% of Nifty, I'm still bullish on. It's too conventional to be bullish on. But yeah, that's be it as it may. But that's one sector which is heavyweight on Nifty. And there is going to be a lot of influx from EPFO in Nifty. And Nifty's biggest beneficiary is financial services, and valuations remain intact. Deposit growth gets some push. So that's why financial services, of course, the usual suspects like defense, railways, roads, definitely get the push, but I don't think those are deep enough sectors for some fund manager to put more than 5-7% of the overall money he's managing.
Mithali, that's always something that most Indian middle class does, realign their portfolios post the budget.
No, I think most Indian middle class, like my father, would be watching this budget, straight up since morning, and then will be telling his, banking correspondent or somebody saying, "Ab ye buy karo, ab ye sell karo," and do it this way. So I do think that there will be some amount of realignment in the portfolios. But today, I think when we look at the state of the announcements that have been made in terms of sectors, there are certain sectors that have been highlighted and which we've been discussing actually since morning, which have come out in the budget as those green shoots and those promising sectors. Green energy, as we predicted in the morning, definitely getting highlighted by the finance minister, where she's even talking about a net zero transition path for even hard to transition sectors. So I think this is a very promising, and I always advocate that your portfolio must link with real economics. Your portfolio must look at, okay, which are the sectors that are actually going to get that push and that support from the government, and green energy clearly coming out, electric mobility clearly coming out, green hydrogen is coming out. I was actually looking at, the allocations that have been made in the Ministry of, Housing and Home Affairs and Affordable Housing, again, getting that boost with 3 crore more affordable houses being announced. Industrial parks, again, 12 new industrial parks coming in, which links with the entire focus on the logistics sector that's been in place under PM Gati Shakti for the last 4-5 years, again continuing to get that boost. So these are certain safe infra stocks, infra investments that one can continue to look at importantly for one's portfolio.
All right, Lloyd, what were your first impressions the second the budget speech ended?
I think it ticked a lot of big concern boxes. I think the first part was really the whole talk about employment generation. The fact that the finance minister addressed upfront issues vis-a-vis employment generation. So skilling, and specifically when she talked about providing EPFO support for all those first-time job hires and people taking on new employees, so the subsidy. I think that was very good signaling. I think the other two reassuring aspects was that the capex expenditure would be maintained. I think one thing that this government has done consistently well is keep up the focus on capex and infra. So I think that part, 1,11,000 crores, and that's great. I think thirdly, I think she spoke about an always important issue in India in the context of agriculture, 1.52 lakh crore in agriculture, and again talking a little bit about natural farming and such like. So I think it did tick some of the main boxes, which was good. I think a couple of concern areas remain, I would say. I think one was, what does it do for export competitiveness? I think for a while right now, I think that's been a little bit of a concern. Our exports have seen a bit of a lull, and I think that is still, to my mind, unaddressed. I haven't seen the fine print. The other point that I think needs to be stressed on, as much as she called this out in her 9 key things, which is reforms, and did mention a few things about land reforms in terms of technology enablements. I didn't see some very clear directions on the reforms front, right? She did go back and say that insolvency and banking, IBC has kind of liberated a lot of money into the economy, but I'm still not seeing a definitive route to reforms. I know privatization has been put on the back burner, it's politically not expedient, but I would still love to have heard out a little big call out on reforms. And I understand this is a difficult budget. This is the first time this government is in a real coalition. And I do understand that they did the right kind of signaling. They talked of a lot of infrastructure projects specific to some of the two states that mattered in a sense.
The allies.
The ally states, certainly, and done pretty well without just, handing out a package. I think talking about development. But I would still think reforms is something I would have loved to have heard out much more clearly and much more specifically.
Feroz, was there anything that you were hoping for that you did not get from this budget?
Yeah, I think I was expecting a better net borrowing. I think 14 lakhs and 11 lakhs. I was expecting some degree of surprise there in terms of the net borrowing, but that has remained identical, which is also a good news. But that's the only thing which I was looking forward to, a little better number in terms of the net borrowing, so that the yields could actually soften and gives headroom for RBI to reduce the interest rates on the repo side from 6.5 downwards, because we are almost at a flat yield curve currently. So that's the only thing which disappointed me. I think the second part, which I think is very critical, is of course the push on the equity. Of course, equity has had some detrimental taxation. 12.5% is not too much of a difference. If anybody would have looked at any change in the capital gain, they would have at least said 15%. So that way, the market is not too disappointed. But I think Indian households have funded the fiscal deficit of our country for long periods of time. The foreigner has always participated in the India growth story using equity, and the domestic household savings have only 6% of money in equity. There has to be some better incentive than just that 1 lakh moving to 1 lakh to for 25,000 exemption. Because for the years, now that the foreigners are actually putting money in Indian bonds, you have a breather to move money of Indian households to equity. What strategically has been done for the flight of capital? Otherwise, India's return, if I interpolated for the last 10 years, Indian households' return on their 800 lakh crores is only 6.8%, give or take, for the last 10 years. So as a country, we have to see how does the household start making double-digit returns, or at least some real returns, and for which they should have structurally done something to encourage flight of capital from debt to equity.
Feroz, if I can just step in with one macroeconomic question before Krishna comes back perhaps to sit this subject. I want to understand from you, Feroz, the fiscal deficit target which the government has now arrived at, which is 4.9% of the GDP as opposed to 5.1% which was stated during the interim budget. My fear is that with coalition politics now creeping in, 26,000 crore rupees allocated for the state of Bihar, 15,000 crore rupees allocated for the redevelopment of Amravati. That is a solid cash out of about 40,000 crore rupees without too much tinkering, except for the long-term capital gains tax, without too much tinkering on the tax front. So is the fiscal deficit target of 5.9% being a little too optimistic for the government?
And if I could just add to that, the fact that she also directionally talked about next year going to 4.5%.
That's right.
So, directionally as well. Sorry.
So, Feroz, too ambitious, 4.9% and 4.5%?
Yes, it is definitely at the face of it very ambitious, like you rightly mentioned, Karthik Bhai. But I personally think the government has always underestimated revenues. Over the last few years, you see the budget estimates are generally beaten reasonably from a revenue standpoint, one. Two, I think the disinvestment targets have not been met over the years. Okay, if you look at the disinvestment targets were 65,000 crores every year, but the actuals turned out to be 35,000 crores. So I think the disinvestment, especially given the kind of rally we have seen in PSUs, I think disinvestment, I think government would definitely seriously want to bring in disinvestment, because there is hardly any free float in our equity markets. The 500th company in the chronological order of free float is 4,000 crores in a country where there is 8 lakh crores of household financial savings. So point I'm trying to make is disinvestment targets can be better achieved, and I think these 40,000 crores crores can be very easily met at these elevated valuations of PSUs, supplying these elevated valuations relatively, but still relative to private sector, PSUs are still undervalued, even on the banking and the non-banking space. So point I'm trying to make is 30,000-40,000 crores, I'm sure is a buffer in the revenue estimate itself, and the disinvestments could actually help to get this 4.5. I think that's why the ambitious target has been put in place, but the numbers have not been aggressive.
One quick thing I want to ask you, if I were to ask you to rate this budget on a scale of 10?
I would say 8.
That's a high rating. Lloyd, quickly, if I were to ask you to rate this budget on a scale of 10?
6.5.
Okay, there is a difference here already. Suyash, do you want to check with our market man Mohit over here?
Yes, Mohit, I wanted to touch upon rupee. Rupee has hit a record low against the US dollar. Why do you think that is the case? Is it because, long-term capital gain tax has been hiked?
Look, maybe I think the market is kind of thinking that people will pull out money because the long-term capital gain taxes have increased. But my overall sense is the fiscal deficit number which the government has put out is extremely promising number. They had a huge largesse from the RBI, which has helped them to come out at that number of 4.9. In the interim project, the projection was at 5.1. The number coming at 4.9, I think, is a massive statement by the government. This government has had the habit of putting out a fiscal deficit number and meeting it. Last year also, if you see, 5.8 was the number. They came in at 5.63, which again was a big boost. And given this, with the fiscal discipline which they're showing, 4.5, if they stick to it, my sense is on the longer term, Suyash, the currency should stabilize again, right? You can have an interim knee-jerk reaction because of your STT taxes going up, because of your short-term going up, LTCG going up, and foreigners might just want to book out some profits and encash their positions or come out of that. But my sense is because your fiscal is getting better and better, your macros are getting more stable, you will see long-term money perhaps coming into the economy. You also have corporate tax rates going down, the MNC tax rates going down, right? These all should encourage foreign money to come in over a long period of time and perhaps stabilize rupee to a larger extent over a long period of time. Short-term impact, yes, definitely it's because of the taxes.
All right, Mohit Gang and Feroz Aziz, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Budget Day and helping us decode Budget 2024. Pleasure having you. Hope to keep having you again and again on the show, on the channel. But for now, we'll let you go. We here at News 9 Live are continuing to bring you non-stop live coverage and understanding of the details of Budget 2024 and what's in it for you, how does it impact you. And the latest to join our day-long broadcast is Mr. Dilip Chenoy. Dilip, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Budget Day. I'm going to begin with a very straightforward question. First of all, rate the budget on a scale of 1 to 10 for us. Where would you rate it?
I'm not taking kind of space, but all I'm saying is anybody who is rating the budget at this point without reading the fine print and without looking at the actual expenditures is not actually looking at the budget very, very closely. And I can, take that, for example, in the auto sector and share those details with you, because a lot of people felt that there's nothing in the budget for the auto sector, which actually, if you look at the detailed expenditure statements, you will find that there is something for a sector. So I think rating should be a little more when you have an access to all the budget documents and the expenditures going on at this point.
Fair enough.
Sorry, I know that there were earlier ratings, but I can't give a rating at this point of time because I just don't know enough.
Okay, we're asking for instinctive ratings, actually, not for the ones with the fine print in our hands. We have Mr. Rakesh Khar also joining us, editor of News 9 Newsverse. Thank you, Rakesh, for being with us. I'm going to quickly check with Dilip. Fact of the matter is that we will leave the broad outline out, specific to green mobility and the transition to electric vehicles. How did you think the budget did?
I think the first thing that the budget signifies in terms of green mobility is continuation of 4 schemes. Right? And if you look at the 4 schemes, the first one is the FAME scheme, right? Where actually 2,671 plus crores have been allocated for the FAME scheme. The second is that the whole PLI scheme, there is continuity in over 3,500 crores has been allocated. And in fact, if you look at the alternate chemistry PLI, another 250 crores has been allocated. In your show last time, we discussed this whole electric mobility promotion scheme. And if you look at the 500 crores that is allocated there, a significant amount is actually allocated to two and three wheelers in this space. All the kind of discussion earlier, structured around the Tesla investment and all of that. So it looks at looking at specific two and three wheeler support going forward. Three other things in the budget which are very important from the context of the auto industry and e-mobility space. The first relates to the customs duty reduction in all of the specialized chemicals and minerals that are required there, and also the plan announced to looking at improving production in India, and also very importantly, a thing that is missed is looking at acquisition of foreign such deposits there. The overall budget from the automotive industry point of view, and in your show, I had talked about reduction, improving consumption capability within the sectors that would be target buyers for the automotive. I think that has been done. People may say that is not enough for what, but I think the first steps have been taken in reduction of the tax rates, direct tax rates. Second, there's an announcement on relooking at the GST rates, so we'll have to wait for that. But third, I think most importantly, the focus on improving rural, and the investment on outlays for rural development, which actually, will improve their ability to consume, etc., going forward, because they'll get jobs and they'll have disposable income there. I think finally, on this aspect, if you look at it, the whole structure of the budget is looking at, the whole skill development and the internship, right? And if you look at it, in the top 500 companies, there are a lot of automotive companies, so they now have an ability to maintain the thing. So overall, nothing mentioned in the speech, but there are a lot of positives in the budget for the automotive sector.
All right, and Krishna, just as Mr. Shenoy was pointing out that, not much in the way for four-wheelers, the passenger vehicles, and we see the reaction in stock price as well. Tata Motors, Mahindra and Mahindra, M&M, and, both of them, the stocks declined by about 3%, and, we were hoping that there would be some, the government would take a page from UP government's page and, introduce a hybrid or maybe get away with the registration tax for hybrid vehicles and make the transition to green mobility technology agnostic. But that did not happen, and we are seeing that reaction in the stock price as well.
Right, and Dilip here, and Rakesh, I'd like to get your view on as well. The fact of the matter is the penetration rate for e-mobility in two-wheelers and three-wheelers is fairly high in India. It is cars where, the penetration rate for three-wheelers in India is 50%. Whereas for cars, it's 1.8%. So the problem is actually the four-wheelers and not the three-wheelers, isn't it, Rakesh ji?
Yeah, obviously, it's in the transition stage that we're moving to the green energy and mobility. So two-wheelers and three-wheelers have been the first pick. Obviously, there has to be a room to bring in the four-wheelers as well. I think the industry also is divided between, pure play EVs, hybrids and other forms of fuels. So that landscape is changing. So in that sense, UP government's move to do hybrids incentive will go and, a step forward, but not necessarily there is need for a national hybrid scheme. There is need for a national emission policy which is green in its nature, which is positive in its nature, but not necessarily favoring one particular perspective. Before I get to the specifics of the budget, I thought it's important to make a few political points as well. There's this whole debate about whether good politics makes bad economics, good economics makes bad politics. I think this budget is purely cast in the norm of, good politics makes good economics, because this is the first budget in the coalition era that the Prime Minister Modi is leading. So in that sense, they put a lot of stress on, the coalition, era, which is the reality now, and that could be very easily reflected in the budget, though it has its own consequences, like one of our panelists was mentioning, the fiscal challenges. But I think the outlays have not been outlandish. In that sense, these are fairly reasonable outlays, and the demand for special category has obviously been ruled out for now. So in the first big political point is that this budget does take cognizance of the coalition era. The two key partners, Andhra Pradesh and Bihar, have found reasonably fair attraction in the speech. What will it lead to? It will lead to many more states in the Indie bloc also asking for a level playing field and seeking such kind of incentives. The other co-political point to my mind, Krishna, is that there is bound to be the opposition saying that there is nothing much in the budget, and they could possibly come back and say that the key scheme that we talked about in terms of the internship in our election pitch has found favor with this particular budget. So in that sense, there could be merit in the opposition saying that finally this government, which was in denial, has come round and found merit in our charge that there is distress on the ground when it comes to jobs.
Right.
And from a BJP's perspective, its well-wishers would argue that had this budget been presented a year ago, then probably the results would have been different. So that's what. And lastly, the political point is that for a change, Nirmala Sitharaman began this time by identifying middle class as a key priority area. Unfortunately, to my mind, as all of you have been pointing out, the tax area, which is key concern area for the middle class, continues to be a laggard. And I would say that middle class continues to be a political orphan.
Okay. We're talking so much of politics on a day of economics. So let's quickly then listen to some of the political reactions that have been coming in on Budget 2024.
This budget has more or less copied the Congress constitution, Congress manifesto, and the main important thing is about the Yuva Nidhi, which Rahul Gandhi ji has in the Bharat Jodo Nyaya Yatra, he has evolved it, and he promised that through the apprenticeship for the first year of the youngsters who are completing, we will give 10 crore jobs to those youngsters with a 8,500 rupees monthly stipend. This government has announced it as 5,000 rupees per youngster who is going to be in the apprenticeship. This shows that this government has copied the ideas of Mr. Rahul Gandhi ji.
ये यूनियन बजट जो 2024-25 का पेश किया गया था, ये एक तरीके से सबके लिए ड्रीम बजट है, सब सेक्शन के लिए और खास करके युवाओं के लिए और महिलाओं के लिए। इससे जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, रिकॉर्ड नंबर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का जो एलोकेशन हुआ है, कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर का 11 लाख करोड़ से भी ज़्यादा कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर, ये ऐतिहासिक है। और अलग अलग राज्यों के लिए जिस प्रकार से खास करके जो ईस्टर्न इंडिया जो इकोनॉमी के लिए थोड़ा सा पिछड़ा है, बिहार, झारखंड, वेस्ट बंगाल, उड़ीसा, आंध्र प्रदेश और साथ साथ में नॉर्थ ईस्ट के लिए जो भी आज बजट में अनाउंसमेंट हुआ है, मुझे लगता है कि ये ईस्टर्न इंडिया एक इकोनॉमिक हब के रूप में उभर के आएगा और बहुत बड़ा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का काम अभी बिहार से लेकर के झारखंड, आंध्र प्रदेश और वेस्ट बंगाल, नॉर्थ ईस्ट का होने वाला है। और
अंग्रेजी में कहूँ, आपको विरोध नहीं है। It's an underwhelming budget. I didn't hear anything about the key issues facing the common people of our country. There was no mention of Manrega. There was no mention or insufficient mention of any steps taken to improve the income of the ordinary person. We have seen far too little from the government when it comes to taking care of the severe income disparities in this country. Job creation, there was a token gesture made towards that, but unfortunately very short on specifics. And I personally welcome only one provision, which is this abolition of the tax on angel investors. I myself had recommended it to Shri Arun Jaitley more than 5 years ago. Finally, it has happened. I'm glad that's being done. We must have more investment coming in to generate more jobs. But otherwise, I find very little in terms of any good creative ideas when it comes to generating more jobs in our economy and more opportunities for young people and for those at the bottom of the pyramid to improve their incomes. We will have to study the budget in much more detail, but I would say it's an underwhelming budget.
देखिए, इसको सिर्फ बिहार से मत देखिए। मैं एक भारतीय के रूप में बहुत प्रसन्न हूँ। रोजगार के नए अवसर बन रहे हैं कि नहीं, करोड़ों में, स्केलिंग में, और बड़ी-बड़ी कंपनियों में आपको रखना है नौजवानों को स्टाइपेंड पर, तो भारत सरकार भी देखे कितनी बड़ी बात है। किसानों को नए आयाम खोलता है कि नहीं, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को बढ़ाता है कि नहीं, देश की चिंता कर रहे हैं। मुद्रा योजना को 10 से 20 लाख उसकी सीमा बढ़ाई गई कि नहीं, कितने को फायदा होगा। और अगर पूरे बाढ़ के लिए जो नेपाल से नदी आती है चिंता की जा रही है तो देश की चिंता है। बिहार प्रभावित होता है, पूरी उत्तर प्रदेश प्रभावित होता है। आप चिंता मत करिए, नालंदा में देश के लोग आते हैं, बोधगया में दुनिया के लोग आते हैं, नालंदा में दुनिया के लोग आते हैं, जो अपना विष्णुपद मंदिर है सभी उसमें आते हैं। तो ये चीजें जब और विकसित होंगी ये बजट विकसित भारत का प्रभावी रोड मैप तैयार करता है। प्रधानमंत्री का अभिनंदन, निर्मला जी का।
And the roadmap to Viksit Bharat, that is of course the political reaction coming in as far as the ruling party is concerned. The budget is out, we're reading the fine prints, well the final budget is yet to be received, but we are discussing of course what has come out of the budgetary speech of Nirmala Sitharaman. Joining us on the show is Shweta Saini, she's an agri economist. Shweta, thank you very much for taking time out. What are you making of the kind of provisions that budget has made for agri and allied sector to the tune of about 1.52 lakh crore rupees? Is that in line with your estimation?
I'll start with 2 points, and I think those are good acknowledgements by the budget to begin with. One is the cooperative federalism acknowledged again. So they're acknowledging that the states have to come on board, and that is coming about across the speech. So that is a very good sign. Unlike the narrative that has been running that now we are an agriculture surplus country and therefore marketing is our focus, we've been saying that how production has to be the refocus, and FM started with that. So these are very big things. We had expected that pulses and oilseeds will have a focus, and interestingly from 1 lakh crore, the allocation in the budget has increased to 10,000 crores. That's a phenomenal allocation of budgets. This is in line with what our expectations were. Another thing that we'd expected is the government is doing a lot on digital, and they have very rightly assessed the acknowledgement to triangulate all these databases. So there are a lot of databases with the government, and she's very nicely put across that the data will be collected in a digital crop survey for 400 districts. So that is a very good sign. They will triangulate it, very good sign. We know ethanol is important, and therefore sugar is going to be playing a very important role. So structurally, the way the support to sugar industry also, we're yet to read the fine print, but it appears that now more funds for the sugar industry are going for ethanol production capacity. That's a very big deal. Two things that I think is kind of, I'm still trying to understand is food subsidy is lower this year. And second, we were thinking PM Kisan 6,000 rupees, if we adjust for inflation, will come to about 7,700 approximately per farmer, and that adjustment would have happened, so that's really not happened. These are quick points, of course, I can take more questions.
All right. We have a soundbite coming in of Sanjeev Puri, Managing Director of ITC. Let's quickly listen to what Sanjeev Puri had to say.
We don't have that reaction.
We don't have the reaction as we'll get the reaction so soon.
So coming back to you, Shweta, apart from agri, there's also an increased thrust and focus on rural development, a provision of 2.66 lakh crore rupees being made for rural infrastructure. Agri infrastructure is something that we've talked about. Apart from the fact the government is now focusing on high-yielding crop, climate-resilient varieties of crop, digital public infrastructure and implementation of that in agri, the fact that there is an increased focus on rural infrastructure, the provision has been increased from 1.66 lakh crore, Krishna, if I'm not wrong, to 2.66 lakh crore rupees. That's literally almost double, 50%.
That is more than a 50% increase in allocation for rural and agri sector.
Are you happy with that number?
I mean, there is no dispute that infrastructural deficits have plagued the value chains, and therefore investments along the value chain, starting from seed to post-harvest to storage to logistics, was important. I think the focus has been correctly there. We've seen horticulture crops suffer largely, and therefore the investments along the chain, particularly in the scheme which is focused on eastern Indian states of Bihar, I think is very phenomenal, was a requirement at the stage today, and this would bolster incomes increases and support also. So I think it's a very welcome move and a much desired impetus they should give.
Rakesh, that is something, for example, the first thing that Prime Minister Modi did after taking office for the record third term is announce the 17th installment of the PM Kisan Samman Nidhi. If I were to talk about it, that set the tone really for what the budget is going to be about, and the budget, following through with that.
But just to add to that question, there's been no increase and adjustment to inflation in PM Kisan, and that should have been now. It's been about 5 years. No adjustment to inflation. It constitutes about 3 to 5% of the total income for farmers.
Right.
About time that number should have been up, but that hasn't happened.
Yeah, there was talk that it was going to be from 6,000 to 8,000, but that hasn't really happened.
Looking at budgets over the decades, you would realize that budget is not the repository of all key economic decisions. In fact, it's on the contrary. Most of the big decisions, including corporate tax cuts last time, were announced outside of the budget. So she's right that there was an expectation that it should go up, and there is still an expectation. And to my mind, it will happen probably outside of the budget, and it will be a big ticket announcement. Like you mentioned, Krishna, that the first announcement that the PM did about the installment release as part of his new government was the Kisan announcement. So in that sense, that 9,000, 6 to 9, whether 6 to 7, 6 to 8, that figure the government would compute would happen, I think, sooner than later. Okay. Second point on agriculture, to my mind, there have been a positive output on improving productivity, but it's easier said than done. We have seen that all these years respective governments have tried to bring about a massive change, a transformation story in agriculture. So it's not only a question of outlays. To my mind, 3 or 4 key challenges face Indian agriculture. One is this, land holding is getting smaller and smaller by the day. How do we address that? That's part one. Part two is that there's very little investments being done by the government or by the private sector in actually R&D for agriculture. That's another major area. Third, technological intervention also militates against the societal mindset. So if I have been growing potatoes all my life, my grandparents have been doing it, I would not shift the crop and do something else.
Right.
So in that sense, technology has to play a big role. Digitization is one part of it, but technology on the ground at the farmland is something that we have to really invest in a big way. That also includes the supply chain management in terms of bringing about a larger shelf life for the produce. And fourth is that we cannot wish away the need to bring in markets. We did bring about a massive reforms in the farm bill, but probably they were not thought through in terms of consultative processes. But that does not obviate the need from actually going to the market leg as well.
Right.
Finally, I think the private sector has to also come in, as have the states to come in investing deeply in agriculture. It cannot be a pure play government role to alleviate the agricultural distress.
All right, and with respect to reforms in the agri sector, the 3 farm laws were expected to bring about that reform, but notwithstanding that the consultative process did not go through, they had to be withdrawn. We were expecting some sort of policy framework or direction with respect to reforms in agri sector. We don't see those reforms, at least in this budget, Shweta.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, one acknowledgement that Economic Survey did yesterday was that till before the survey came out, we knew 86% of our land holdings were small and marginal. Yesterday, the number has increased to 89%. So having said this, we know that the farmers are getting smaller over time. But there is a dire need to also look at how the Indian farmers have been changing over time. For example, I just heard the panelists here talk about how the farmers have inertia in their cropping pattern. The Indian farmer today is really smart. I go to the extent of saying that probably farmers in Bihar are more informed than farmers in Punjab. It is the policy that has actually pushed them to, for example, not diversifying away from rice and wheat. We've been saying it that every time there is access to water, farmers shift to paddy. So therefore, there is a requirement for the policy to really go from top to down and rethink if it is pulses or oilseeds that they need versus if they need more rice and wheat. So I can sense from at least the way the allocations have been done under PM Asha and Price Stability Fund that pulses and oilseeds rightfully are a focus area for them. There has been announcement by also Mr. Amit Shah that they will be procuring pulses. So at least to that extent, they've catered to wanting to diversify. And that's a welcome change because it will be more than just a promise. But I would agree that farmers are getting smaller. Having said this, small land holding does not necessarily imply lower income. You need them to diversify to high value agriculture. Second thing, there has been a focus on allied activities. Marine feed has been made cheaper. So inland fishery is made to be grown. So I think there are signals But we'll have to wait and see how it pans out. But I think the signals are there. Climate resilience and R&D has to be focused, and they've said it. Another thing that I will add is that amongst the speech, there is mention about policy documents, mention about research and experts finding out a roadmap. So that's a good sign. They are willing to plan, they are willing to preempt situations. And given that we interact with the governments also, we see a greater appetite to understanding what is happening on the ground. So I think we see overall good signals. And of course, it is just a work in progress. We know for sure announcements come out of budget. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you.
Yeah, one last part on agriculture before we move to sectors. Shweta and Krishna, what is happening is that the government, whether this government or the earlier governments, they need to be, there's a very ad hoc approach about processing and having a policy framework for agri-food imports and exports. So there is absolutely a political connect there. You know, we have had, you know, a long history of importing when, you know, onion prices go high because it's a politically sensitive issue. We need to have a time frame oriented policy so that the farmers on the ground know exactly, you know, suddenly we export ban of onions or cotton and imports are done in a very ad hoc manner. So that policy framework, this government must look at it and understand the impact it is having, the adverse impact it is having on the ground when it comes to farmers actually planning their yields. In that sense, that's also a key component of agriculture reforms.
All right, so exports of non-basmati white rice or wheat for that matter, those market interventions need to be thought through. Shweta Saini, thank you very much for taking time out, for joining us on this very important day on Agri. It does look like at least, you know, experts are happy with the kind of you know, provisioning the budget has made for both agri as well as rural economy. Krishna.
Oh, definitely. And, you know, agriculture and farm distress has been a topic that has been very important for this government to address. And clearly the budget, you know, ensuring in terms of putting the money where the mouth is, literally in terms of increasing allocations. We have some more special guests joining us on this broadcast here on News 9 Live. We have Dikshu C. Kukreja, Managing Principal Architect, CP Kukreja Architects joining us. We also have Shailesh Pathak, Infrastructure and Urban Development Expert joining us.
Well, I think it's a budget which is very progressive. I think it definitely reflects what one is talking about, a Viksit Bharat in the making, and the kind of, I would say, 360-degree or all perspective announcements that have come, particularly when it's related to urban planning, cities, providing better infrastructure in cities to do with more homes, 1 million more homes to be created, or 10 million homes, sorry, for the urban poor. I think all these are very progressive announcements that have been made in the budget. I also find it extremely positive to see that there's encouragement for the youth. I think many times that sector does tend to get overlooked in our previous budgets. Here I see that the idea of encouraging youth to join the workforce, providing them 1 month's salary on joining as towards their provident fund, etc., etc. These are all very progressive moves. Even looking at the MSME sector, I think is a very important announcement that has been made in the budget. So overall, I would give it a thumbs up in the sense of seeing all-round development of the country across different sectors, both rural and urban. I think this is very progressive, the announcements so far that have come to light for me in this budget.
Okay. Shailesh, your quick reaction on the kind of capex provisioning this government has made. It is continuing with what the interim government announced at 11.11 lakh crore rupees. That is going to be the money towards capital expenditure that the budget has allocated. Are you happy with that number? There's no increase in that number, but that in itself was an 11% increase from the budget last year.
Indeed, very rightly said. If you really look at 11.11 lakh crore, out of a total budget size of 48.21 lakh crores, that's a very large number. And if you look at it as proportional GDP, it's 3.4. But what I was really impressed with was the continuity over the last 11 years. I've been tracking budgets for a long time, and budget speeches have never spelled out the critical importance of urban development and cities for economic growth as growth hubs. Just to leave you with one number, they're talking about 14 cities with more than 30 lakh population and launching transit-oriented development schemes in all these 14 cities. These 14 cities contribute more than half of India's GDP. So cities matter.
Cities matter.
Okay,
They do
and in fact, the 9 priorities that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman alluded to, urban development and infrastructure are clearly spelt out as a key area. Shailesh, you want to add to that?
Yes. So, I was looking at the list of priorities, and urban development actually came at number 5, energy transition at number 6, and infrastructure at number 7. I would say all 9 priorities are things that have been the focus of this government and earlier governments over the last many years. But the quality of execution and implementation, particularly in infrastructure and in urban development, energy transition, has been stupendous over the last few years. That's what the other thing to look at is water supply, rental housing, and urban housing. I think this comprehensive relook at how our cities can become more business friendly, more resident friendly, is most welcome.
And increasing the number of cities in the first place, isn't it? Because jobs are being made in clusters, and creating those job clusters is another thing that the budget will do, isn't it, Dikshu?
May I just add here? I don't think it's about increasing the number of cities. In fact, one of the things that have been specifically mentioned is brownfield redevelopment of cities.
Okay.
And I am firmly in the camp of new cities take forever to develop and yield job opportunities. It's much better to make existing cities more efficient and effective.
Dikshu?
So, as a passionate urbanist, I would also say I am gloating over the fact that attention is being paid increasingly so, and particularly in this budget, on cities. That is the need of the hour. I think as a finance minister, allocating funds is a very important step in that direction. But thereafter, the aspect of execution and how this money in a timely manner, in a very clear, convincing, fast-track manner is in a balanced way spread across in the city's livability index. How do we improve the livability of these cities is very important. So how that gets spent becomes very critical. But of course, first things first, the announcement that there is this kind of money spent happening towards cities and urban development is very positive. I think this is the need of the hour. I would only say that this now must be very well integrated and closely knit with the aspect of environment, because let's remember, all our cities, and we see that on your news channels as well, are reeling under climate change. Therefore, it's important that we look at whether it's the air quality, the water scarcity, and all other aspects of urban challenges or civic issues that we keep coming to our light, and as citizens we face day in, day out. How that gets integrated also is very important, because you can't just keep loading cities with more development. The development has to be done in the right model and the right framework. That is equally important. Yes, that discussion can happen on another day, but I'm just highlighting here that the first step of paying that attention towards city and spending towards cities, I definitely would compliment that very much.
All right, and gentlemen, we were talking about affordable housing right before the start of the budget speech. There is some mention of that. So, of the 10 lakh crore which has been allocated for urban housing, about 2.25 lakh crore in the next 5 years would be central assistance towards interest subsidy to facilitate loans at an affordable rate. Essentially, affordable housing, focus and thrust on making it essential for people to at least get some roof over their head, and especially for urban poor. So there is a focus on urban poor there. Government in a way acknowledging that there is a problem here with respect to affordable housing and something needs to be done. Rakesh?
Absolutely. I mean, housing, Roti Kapda Makan, the proverbial film, that still is a reality. I was looking at Manmohan Singh's historic budget. He talked about the inequity, and there is need to, sort of say, remove that. So many decades down the line, we still have that challenge. So India is essentially a poor country. There are no overnight solutions. So urban housing, rural housing are challenges that need long-term solutions. I have a couple of questions for both our esteemed panelists. One is that, most of the challenges for our big ticket metros, mega metros, is that, migration, and, it's because of work labor related issues. Is there time now finally to do the unpopular decision of putting a cap on that, doing a moratorium on that? Because otherwise, this issue of development, we have to scale development down to see that these cities become durable. That's question number one. Little controversial, I would say.
Very controversial.
Second is that this long-term capital gains tax. It may not be as attractive now with the new change that has been announced today to invest in a second house to gain of to partake of the capital gains tax challenge. So do we see a slowdown in that housing activity in the reality market? That's a question.
Dikshu, you were raising your hand.
Definitely like to respond to that very pertinent issue that has just been raised about urban migration. I think that's a very, very critical aspect for our country, and the sooner we recognize it, the better. In this case, being a democracy and the fact that every citizen has an equal right towards their prosperity, towards meeting their aspirations and dreams, I don't think there can be ever a moratorium on or a cap on the population of a city. However, having said that, my theory on this, and I've been writing about this for a while now and talking about it, is that we need to create suitable alternatives. And for me, the solution lies in balanced development. When we start creating opportunities in those tier 2, tier 3 cities, in our towns, we have over 5,000 towns in this country. When we can start creating those kind of opportunities for the citizens in those areas, automatically you are controlling urban migration. The need is that when you don't have those basic facilities or a means of livelihood in where you live, it could be the village or town or a very small city, then you choose to do migration. That's one side of the story. The other side is, of course, providing good allocation of infrastructure in these smaller areas, in these smaller cities, in towns, so that they become then centers for private investment also to happen. They could become educational hubs, tourism hubs, research hubs, etc., etc. And I think that is where we need to start focusing. Otherwise, there's no doubt that our cities are choking, and the more money you put into them, that money is really literally the way in Delhi we see the money being pumped into Yamuna, but no change ever happening. Same way the money is getting drowned if we put into cities and do not solve these larger systemic challenges that our cities are facing, like the one you talked about, urban migration.
Okay.
So let me give a little perspective here. All of you went to school in some city or the other. From that time, it has doubled in size. And in the next 25 years, the same city will double in size from 2024. So I would be very hesitant to advocate a Chinese hukao kind of system where migrants to cities don't have benefits. In fact, the easy way to resolve this situation is give migrants the right to join the electoral roll of the city that they migrate to, which is currently very difficult. And maybe 5 years down the line, allow anyone with an Aadhaar link to decide which electoral constituency she or he would like to be in. That will actually give the migrant a political voice, and all the MLAs and MPs will start bothering about them. We have to make sure that migrants have an easy landing when they arrive at the city. And that's something that some of us are working on. On your second question, Rakesh, I think the move towards financialization of savings in India is most welcome. This point about, can you buy 73 apartments and speculate in real estate is probably getting less. And real estate, remember, has a special tax benefit because there is a Section 54 EC that allows you to reduce that burden of tax on your capital gains. So hopefully speculation in real estate will come down, but affordable housing, and I've worked on affordable housing models, is largely prohibitive because of the land cost. So some of us, there was a mention in titles, urban land and rural land titles. Some of us are working towards reducing the price of land itself by innovative mechanisms. Thanks.
Just to clarify, we were not advocating a cap on migration. I was looking at some out-of-box solutions. So,
fair enough.
Hopefully not. I think most of us happen to be at least first-generation migrants to Delhi. And if there were to be enough and more opportunities in our home cities, I think we wouldn't be here. All of us would love to be back as to where we came from. But, yes, you were saying.
Yeah, just wanted to take the conversation on creation of infrastructure to two specific things that got announced in the budget. Rakesh always talks about the political context in which his budget is arriving in, and true to that, you see one huge allocation for the creation of a brand new capital city, Dikshu, which is called Amaravati, and then of course the other is for the allocation to the state of Bihar as well. I just want to understand, how did you view these? fair enough, at the end of the day, we are developing a brand new city which comes with so many advantages. You develop new infrastructure, more job creation, and more urban living spaces, if I may. But how did you view these announcements?
I would say in a large, diverse, complex country such as ours, with the kind of population that we have, 1/6 literally of the world's population is living in this country, and the land mass is what, 2.7% or less than 3% is the overall land mass. So of course, we have a density issue. We have challenges of urban development, and for that, there cannot be just one solution fits all. I would say a complete overall approach and in this case, the idea of announcing a greenfield city is also very welcome, because while I'm not a complete advocate for greenfield cities, and I think brownfield development has more responsibility attached to it, having said that there are areas, particularly in a situation like Andhra, which is a new state in that sense, or bifurcated state, it does not have the infrastructure which is commensurate for a state capital. In that case, to develop a greenfield city, by all means, I think is a welcome step. It also gives us lots of opportunities of creating a model which the world can look up and see of how a greenfield new city can be done. I think we lost those opportunities when we did the Naya Raipur and even the new part of Ranchi when Jharkhand became a new state. So this is yet another an opportunity which we should not lose, that we create a city of Amravati which the world can see is one of the most responsibly designed from a sustainable design point of view city, which has an economic equitable development attached to it, a development which is with nature, not at the cost of nature. So I think there are a lot of opportunities, and of course there is a need attached to it as well.
All right. Shailesh, there is also, and perhaps not for the first time, a mention of an all-round development for eastern region of the country. There is a proposal for road connectivity project. There is also a proposal for a 2-lane bridge over Ganga in Buxar at a total cost of 26,000 crore rupees. I think about time that there is some focus on northeastern region.
In fact, Purvodaya was there in the BJP manifesto also. And today, the 5 states that will be part of it, the ascent of the East are specifically mentioned. But I just wanted to take that question on Bihar and infrastructure. Look, Bihar has 1/5 the per capita income of Maharashtra. Any infrastructure development in Bihar is good. So what are the 3 major infrastructure projects that were announced today? One is Patna to Purnia, which is broadly an expressway with north of the Ganga. The other is Buxar to Bhagalpur, which I assume will be...
hate to interrupt you. We will take your views on Bihar. But for now, we have Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaking. Let's cut across live and listen.
मैं सभी देशवासियों को बधाई देता हूं। वित्त मंत्री निर्मला सीतारमण जी और उनकी पूरी टीम बहुत बहुत बधाई की पात्र है। साथियों, ये बजट समाज के हर वर्ग को शक्ति देने वाला बजट है। ये देश के गांव गरीब किसान को समृद्धि की राह पर ले जाने वाला बजट है। पिछले 10 वर्षों में 25 करोड़ लोग गरीबी से बाहर निकले हैं। ये जो न्यू मिडिल क्लास बना है, यह बजट उनके सशक्तिकरण की निरंतरता का बजट है। इन नौजवानों को अनगिनत नए अवसर देने वाला बजट है। इस बजट से शिक्षा और स्किल को नई स्केल मिलेगी। ये मिडिल क्लास को नई ताकत देने वाला बजट है। ये जनजातीय समाज, दलित, पिछड़ों को सशक्त करने की मजबूत योजनाओं के साथ आया है। इस बजट से महिलाओं की आर्थिक भागीदारी सुनिश्चित करने में मदद मिलेगी। इस बजट से छोटे व्यापारियों, एमएसएमईज को यानी कि लघु उद्योगों का उसकी प्रगति का नया रास्ता मिलेगा। बजट में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पर भी बल है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर भी बल है। इससे आर्थिक विकास को नई गति मिलेगी और गति को भी निरंतरता मिलेगी। साथियों, रोजगार और स्वरोजगार के अभूतपूर्व अवसर बढ़ ये हमारी सरकार की पहचान रही है। आज का बजट इसे और सुदृढ़ करता है। देश और दुनिया ने पीएलआई स्कीम की सफलता देखी है। अब इस बजट में सरकार ने एम्प्लॉयमेंट लिंक्ड इंसेंटिव स्कीम की घोषणा की है। इससे देश में करोड़ों करोड़ों नए रोजगार बनेंगे। इस योजना के तहत जीवन में पहली नौकरी पाने वाले युवा की पहली तनख्वाह हमारी सरकार देगी। स्किल डेवलपमेंट और उच्च शिक्षा के लिए मदद हो या फिर 1 करोड़ नौजवानों को इंटर्नशिप की योजना, इससे गांव के गरीब के मेरे नौजवान साथी, मेरे बेटे बेटी देश की टॉप कंपनियों में काम करेंगे। उनके सामने संभावनाओं के नए द्वार खुलेंगे। हमें हर शहर, हर गांव, हर घर एंटरप्रेन्योर्स बनाना है। इसी उद्देश्य से बिना गारंटी के मुद्रा लोन की लिमिट को 10 लाख से बढ़ाकर 20 लाख रुपए किया गया है। इससे छोटे कारोबारियों, विशेष रूप से महिलाओं, दलित, पिछड़े, आदिवासी परिवारों में स्वरोजगार को बल मिलेगा। साथियों, हम सब लोग मिलकर भारत को ग्लोबल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब बनाएंगे। देश का एमएसएमई सेक्टर मध्यम वर्ग से जुड़ा हुआ है। एक प्रकार से एमएसएमई सेक्टर की ओनरशिप मध्यम वर्ग ही है और इसी सेक्टर से गरीबों को ज्यादा से ज्यादा रोजगार भी मिलता है। छोटे उद्योगों की बड़ी ताकत, उस दिशा में हमारा अहम कदम है। इस बजट में एमएसएमईज के लिए ईज ऑफ क्रेडिट बढ़ाने वाली नई योजना का ऐलान किया गया है। मैन्युफैक्चरिंग और एक्सपोर्ट्स इकोसिस्टम को हर जिले तक ले जाने के लिए बजट में अहम घोषणा की गई है। ई कॉमर्स, एक्सपोर्ट हब्स और फूड क्वालिटी टेस्टिंग के लिए 100 यूनिट्स, ऐसे कदमों से वन डिस्ट्रिक्ट वन प्रोडक्ट अभियान को गति मिलेगी। साथियों, ये बजट हमारे स्टार्टअप्स के लिए, इनोवेशन इकोसिस्टम के लिए ढेर सारे नए अवसर लेकर आया है। स्पेस इकोनॉमी को बढ़ावा देने के लिए 1000 करोड़ रुपए का फंड हो, एंजल टैक्स हटाने का फैसला हो, ऐसे कई सारे कदम इस बजट में उठाए गए हैं। साथियों, रिकॉर्ड हाई कैपेक्स इकोनॉमी का एक ड्राइविंग फोर्स बनेगा। 12 नए इंडस्ट्रियल नोड्स, देश में नए सैटेलाइट टाउन्स का विकास और 14 बड़े शहरों के लिए ट्रांजिट प्लान्स। इससे देश में नए इकोनॉमिक हब विकसित होंगे और बहुत बड़ी संख्या में नए रोजगार बनेंगे। साथियों, आज डिफेंस एक्सपोर्ट्स रिकॉर्ड स्तर पर है। इस बजट में डिफेंस सेक्टर को आत्मनिर्भर बनाने के लिए अनेक प्रावधान किए गए हैं। आज पूरी दुनिया में भारत के प्रति आकर्षण बढ़ा है और भारत में टूरिज्म के क्षेत्र में नई संभावनाएं बनी हैं। टूरिज्म क्षेत्र गरीब और मध्यम वर्ग के लिए कई अवसर लेके आता है। इस बजट में टूरिज्म क्षेत्र पर भी विशेष बल दिया गया है। साथियों, एनडीए सरकार ने पिछले 10 साल में ये सुनिश्चित किया है कि गरीब और मध्यम वर्ग को लगातार टैक्स से राहत मिलती रहे। इस बजट में भी इनकम टैक्स में कटौती और स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन में भी वृद्धि का फैसला लिया गया है। टीडीएस के नियमों को भी सरल किया गया है। इन कदमों से हर टैक्स पेयर को अतिरिक्त बचत होने वाली है। साथियों, देश के विकास के लिए भारत के पूर्वी क्षेत्र का संपूर्ण विकास पूर्वोदय के विजन द्वारा हमारे इस अभियान को नई गति, नई ऊर्जा मिलेगी। हम पूर्वी भारत में कई महत्वपूर्ण इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर जैसे हाईवेज, वाटर प्रोजेक्ट्स और पावर प्रोजेक्ट्स का निर्माण कर विकास को नई गति देंगे। साथियों, इस बजट का एक बहुत बड़ा फोकस देश के किसान है। अन्न भंडारण के लिए दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी स्कीम के बाद अब हम वेजिटेबल प्रोडक्शन क्लस्टर्स बनाने जा रहे हैं। इससे एक और छोटे किसानों को फल, सब्जियों, अन्य उपज के लिए नए बाजार मिलेंगे, बेहतर दाम मिलेंगे। तो दूसरी ओर हमारे मध्यम वर्ग के लिए फल, सब्जियों की उपलब्धता बढ़ेगी और परिवार के लिए पोषण भी सुनिश्चित होगा। कृषि क्षेत्र में भारत का आत्मनिर्भर बनना समय की मांग है। इसलिए दलहन, तिलहन की पैदावार बढ़ाने के लिए किसानों को मदद की घोषणा की गई है। साथियों, देश में गरीबी समाप्त हो, गरीब का सशक्तिकरण हो, इस दिशा में भी आज के बजट में प्रमुख घोषणाएं की गई है। गरीबों के लिए 3 करोड़ नए घर बनाना तय हुआ है। जनजातीय उन्नत ग्राम अभियान सैचुरेशन अप्रोच के साथ 5 करोड़ आदिवासी परिवारों को मूलभूत सुविधाओं से जोड़ा जाएगा। इसके अलावा ग्राम सड़क योजना 25,000 नए ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों को ऑल वेदर रोड से जोड़ेगी। इसका लाभ देश के सभी राज्यों के दूर दराज गांवों को मिलेगा। साथियों, आज का बजट नए अवसर, नई ऊर्जा लेकर आया है। ये ढेर सारे नए रोजगार, स्वरोजगार के अवसर लेकर आया है। ये बेटर ग्रोथ और ब्राइट फ्यूचर लेकर आया है। आज का बजट भारत को दुनिया की तीसरी सबसे बड़ी आर्थिक ताकत बनाने के उस पूरी प्रक्रिया में कैटलिस्ट का काम करेगा। विकसित भारत की एक ठोस नींव रखेगा। सभी देशवासियों को बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's reaction there on the budget, saying it's a growth-oriented budget at the end of the day, and something that sort of paves the way for the Viksit Bharat that we've been talking about, doesn't it, Shweta?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, new urja, new disha, a new direction, and perhaps renewed energy. That is what the government and Prime Minister is saying at the moment on the back of the budget announcements. But sticking on with, they say political is economics and economics is political. In a budget, nothing is really economics only. And this budget has really also gone on to play with what is happened in the center, and that is a fractured mandate, essentially trying to keep all the allies happy, especially Andhra and Bihar. A total allocation, albeit for infrastructure development, for development of roads in Bihar and in Andhra for the new capital, a total expenditure of about 41,000 crore rupees. Extremely substantial amount there, Karthik.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at it in context, 26,000 crore rupees for Bihar and 15,000 crore rupees for the completion of the development of Amravati, now the sole capital of Andhra Pradesh. So that's about 41,000 crore rupees in allocation. To put it in context, while this allocation is not just for the year, I believe it is going to be extended for a few years. But if you were to look at this number in context, this is pretty much equal to the total fiscal deficit in monetary terms of India. So at some stage, while the special state status has not been given to Andhra and Bihar, it has pretty much given it without giving it. Right?
Very special allocation.
So it's special allocation. Now I think, specifically on Bihar, the four key cities that really emerged from Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's speech were Gaya, Bodh Gaya, and both these cities are now going to be part of the Kashi Vishwanath project. So that is solid infrastructure redeployment and funds redeployment towards ensuring that the tourism, the religious tourism circuit now also includes Gaya and Bodh Gaya, both in Bihar. In addition to this, I think the focus on Rajgir and the focus on Nalanda University and the tourism opportunities that would come up in those locations as well is something that Finance Minister focused on. So all in all, 26,000 crore rupees by way of infrastructure development and inclusion of Bihar in the tourism circuit is pretty much giving it funds which would have perhaps been akin to the special status had Bihar got one. So the Finance Minister has given special status without really giving it. Even Andhra Pradesh, for that matter, Chandrababu Naidu, the newly sworn in Chief Minister, had come and, I wouldn't say the term lobbied while saying it like the special status, but had come and tried to influence both Finance Minister as well as Prime Minister Modi to have this allocation of 15,000 crore rupees for completing the Amravati project, which has been hanging in balance now for the last 5 years. So, in fact, 10 years, really because it was 2014 when Amravati was actually announced to be the capital, could not be completed. So, 15,000 crore rupees is what Chandrababu Naidu had asked for, and 15,000 crore rupees is what Chandrababu Naidu gets. So, no negotiation there.
That they have.
Absolutely, right.
The numbers are playing correct there as far as Andhra Pradesh is concerned. I believe joining us on the show is Hina Kushalani she's from EY, she's a partner climate change and sustainability. Hina, thank you very much for taking time out. Climate change and sustainability, of course, continues to be one of the key priority areas, and it features relatively up in the list, come to think of it, energy security, and a part of, in fact, everything that's come about from energy security to infrastructure. There is a mention of climate change, there is a mention of what climate change can do to agri, to urban infrastructure. What are you making of what was the key takeaway for you from the budget?
So thanks for having me. And I want to start with what Krishna has been asking pretty much everybody before me is, how do you rate the budget? I would, frankly, from a climate change and sustainability angle, I would rate this budget around 5, because I think from an idealistic perspective, there's quite a bit happening. You're right. Pretty much all the 9 priority sectors, there is some sort of a sustainability angle, and sustainability is not just the environment, right? It's also social. So it's that ways, yes, it does hit all the right notes, but is it doing enough is the question. I think there are a lot of budget allocations towards, infrastructure, towards climate resilient crops, towards agriculture specifically, everywhere that we're suffering in India as a country. See, India is going to be a country that's going to see major impact from climate change. change. I think we already have starting to see. There are projections that India would start losing at least 3% or 5% of its GDP to climate change if we don't pay attention to climate mitigation and resilience, right? Or adaptation in some cases. Right. So from that perspective, the fact that we're investing in agriculture, the fact that there's a conversation on climate resilient crops is fantastic. But when it comes to 11.11 lakh crores being allocated for infrastructure, that we're focusing on urban housing, but there is no conversation. I think climate needs to be integrated in every single aspect of development India focuses on between now and 2070. Okay. I felt that currently the budget did fall short on those fronts, like the fact that 2.66 lakhs on rural infrastructure. How can we make sure that pretty much everything that's being invested is resilient to climate change? The infrastructure, the bridges that are being built, the ports, I mean, pretty much everything along the... So there was no mention of the fact that everything that we're investing in, the taxpayer money that's being invested as a part of this budget will be resilient to climate change, because climate change is a threat to everything, right? I mean, you name it, urban development, energy security. I mean, just investing in renewables and energy security is not going to be enough. It's great that we did talk about finally center support for wastewater and sewage treatment in 100 cities. I think that's definitely a space with India's cities being so crowded. It's certainly an area that there's not been a lot of private money that's been able to flow. I mean, we have, when it comes to waste and water infrastructure, India is an emerging economy, is one of, is lagging behind. And that was important, but I think we'll have to await a lot more details as to how this is going to be bankable, because so far, a lot of solid waste management projects have not been bankable at all. So how do we, I think we'll have to wait for a lot more details.
Okay. Hina, if I can just step in for a minute. Hi, thanks for joining us, Karthik here. Just want to get your views, Hina, on nuclear energy. That has been a focus of the budget this time around. I think the entire transformation of green energy that that India has been wanting to focus on. Nuclear energy, I think, at some level draws that balance where it's, it's definitely better for the climate and not as as complex and as difficult to produce as other renewable sources are. So in some sense, that green push by way of nuclear energy does seem to have made it to the finance minister's speech this time.
Absolutely. I think, and frankly, I think nuclear energy has been a debate globally in terms of the potential versus green and, so many other aspects. I think in Europe, there's been a lot of investments going on. I think the idea, Karthik, that nuclear energy has come from diversification of energy, in India. And it's important to not put all our eggs in one basket like a solar or a wind. I think it's important to diversify, and that's fantastic. The amount of, but in terms of how long is it going to take for us to be able to diversify our energy and to be able to see some of these returns? It's good that we're making those investments today in 2024, but it will take, at least a decade for us to be able to see some of these. And the idea is while we continue to invest in energy transition, I think that's one aspect this government has been very good at in terms of while, I think India is doing a lot more as an emerging economy in energy security and energy transition compared to many others. Right. And we've been very progressive, and that's fantastic. I think nuclear energy is just one more top-notch idea in that zone. But with that being said, the idea is also to make sure that we're resilient to climate change, and that's where we're starting to fall short. That's certainly an aspect that this government needs to focus a lot more on. Another aspect, if I may highlight, Karthik, that was a welcome move is the taxonomy for climate finance. Right. Many global investors, I think this is a conversation we've been doing, with multiple investors, both on the private fronts, on the development financial institutions fronts. We really need that taxonomy in India to be able to fill that financing gap. We have not, that is a very welcome move, and the idea that many of the hard to abate sectors in India, like iron and steel, aviation, chemicals, mines, it's important that we need the taxonomy in place so that we can actually get more international funding as well aligned to this taxonomy towards decarbonizing some of these sectors. Right. Even many of Indian banks have started to go into the net zero transition mode, and most of them have been really awaiting this taxonomy from the government, and this is a very welcome move, I would say.
Right, Lloyd, climate financing is crucial if you want to create climate-resistant urban infrastructure, rural infrastructure. So in that sense, this first step towards a taxonomy as an economy created through taxation for those industries, including shipping, aviation, who have heavy carbon footprints, is a welcome move, isn't it, Lloyd?
Absolutely. I think absolutely welcome move. But I also want to get to the point that Karthik, budget level, I think makes a great statement, right? I think it's one of the good things of the budget.
Directionally, absolutely, but we don't have too much details at this stage.
There is a little context to nuclear in India. We haven't had a great luck with it because it's a politically sensitive issue. So we have a project in the south which has run into trouble on the civil society group. That's right. So, how does it play going forward? I welcome the idea to diversify the basket, and nuclear is welcome. Globally also it plays a key role as a percentage of the total transition. But how does it play on the ground, especially with some of the states where it is going to be located in the south, not with the BJP coalition era?
On the Kudam project, I had the opportunity to cover the protest around the project, mainly on the back of the fact that it was Russia-India partnership.
That's right.
and people were worried there.
People are still worried.
Very worried, and they continue to protest for the fact that they don't know the kind of impact it will have on their lives, the land pollution, the water pollution. So perhaps it's also time for government to really cater to some of those questions and ally some of those fears and doubts in the minds of
There's a global learning there which needs to be replicated here. In that sense, especially when you bring in the private sector, most of the announcements on nuclear today by the finance minister talked about roping in the PPP model where private sector plays a key role. So private sector, nuclear, it's a political tinderbox.
Lloyd, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, I get that sensitivity. One is nuclear per se has a kind of scary connotation to a lot of people at one level, and two is to get the private sector brings another level to what extent it can be. But I still believe that directionally it's a right call out. Hopefully we'll get there in due course. And I also believe that the perception around nuclear has gone through ups and downs. Fukushima was one, Kudam was the other one. But I think over time the world is realizing that long term it possibly is going to be one of the best solutions.
It is going to it has to be part of the energy mix. So
absolutely, the basket has to be as rich with one component as with all other components. So whether it is solar, renewable, green energy, has to be one full big basket comprising these components.
It already comprises about 45% of India's total energy needs. So we are getting there eventually. I believe that the mix has to be more diverse, and that 45% perhaps need to be up in times to come as far as India's power consumption and power needs is concerned. I believe we'll come back to you, Henna. We do have some reactions which are coming in. I believe Sanjeev Puri, CII President, also Managing Director, ITC, has spoken to us. Let's quickly listen in.
See, it's the first point, in fact, that the Finance Minister spoke about in the 9 priorities was on agriculture, productivity and resilience. I think a lot of areas have been touched upon there, from the investments in research for resilience, the tools for productivity, the focus on agri infrastructure. So many positives there. The agri stack, digitization of agriculture. So many good things out there. So the investments there are over a period of time certainly going to provide a much more productive and resilient agriculture and therefore a rural economy. See, it's the first point, in fact, that the Finance Minister spoke about in the 9 priorities was on agriculture, productivity and resilience. I think a lot of areas have been touched upon there, from the investments in research for resilience, the tools for productivity, the focus on agri infrastructure. So many positives there. The agri stack, digitization of agriculture. So many good things out there. So the investments there are over a period of time certainly going to provide a much more productive and resilient agriculture and therefore a rural economy.
That was Sanjeev Puri, Managing Director of ITC and the President of CII, speaking on the focus on agriculture. Number 1 priority in the list of 9 priorities that was mentioned by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. We have Hina Kushtani still with us. Hina, but the fact of the matter is that the focus on climate change and creating climate resistant infrastructure is something that's been ongoing with the government. But what do you think can be done from here on in that respect? If you don't think that, if you rate this budget as just 5 on 10, as far as addressing climate change issues are concerned, quickly before that, I want to ask you, remove climate, how would you rate the budget otherwise, on a scale of 1 to 10?
While you were speaking, Hannah, just to add to that, I actually tried to find the word climate in the budget highlight. It was just once. Just once. And which is the climate
capital allocation for climate, right?
resilient variety.
We know how much.
5 is a very high rating in that sense. Okay, overall budget rating from you, Hina?
I would say a 7. As a citizen, regardless of climate, a 7, but definitely a 5 when it comes to climate. Yeah.
Okay,
bigger priorities.
What would you have liked to see, seen in this budget with regards to climate? What would you ideally like to see?
I think, like I said, Karthik, see the 9 priority areas. Like if you look at it, agriculture, social justice, manufacturing, urban development. We're investing so much of our money, of public money across these. We need to make sure that every single penny that's being actually spent is resistant to climate or is being looked at from a climate lens. Frankly, that's the biggest gap that needs to be filled desperately. 11.11 lakhs for infrastructure, 3% of GDP. We need to make sure that all of that is going in climate resilient infrastructure. There's absolutely no point when we're seeing the impacts of floods, we're seeing the impacts of climate change across our cities, and that's welcome that 11,500 crores has been allocated to a few states to actually manage the floods and irrigation schemes. But at the end of the day, it need not be just that one tiny portion of the entire budget. It has to be across everything. I mean, the 1.5 lakhs for agriculture, that the schemes that are going out, how much of that is being looked at from the climate lens? I think it's important that climate becomes an integral part of disbursing these funds everywhere. And that is what's currently missing. And I would say if we can actually put more guidelines on how do we make sure that pretty much even the urban housing, I mean, we're looking at 10 lakh crores for urban housing for the poor. How much of that is going towards green housing? We really need the real estate sector in India contributes 20% of India's emissions. I mean, what are we looking at when we look at the green building situation in India and how much of our new constructions are green? It's minuscule at this stage. And that's really where we need to make sure that every single penny that we're spending towards, benefiting these stakeholders, benefiting the poor, it has to be resilient to climate.
All right, Hina, thank you very much for taking time out and for joining us today. It's a crucial day. Let's also quickly listen into some of the reactions that have come in from political arena. Reactions from opposition calling it a dud budget there, but let's listen into what they had to say.
अरे ये तो कुर्सी बचाओ बजट है। उनको कुर्सी बचाने के लिए जो पार्टी को लेके कुर्सी बचाते हैं उनके लिए बजट है। एनडीए वाला जो है उसका साथ नीतीश कुमार और आंध्र प्रदेश का उनको सेव करने के लिए, उनको पास में रखने के लिए इसका बजट है। ये इंडिया का बजट नहीं है, देश के लिए बजट नहीं है। उन्होंने बंगाल को तो कुछ ही नहीं दिया है। बंगाली को वो लोग देखने नहीं सकता है, बंगाल को वो लोग देखने नहीं सकता है। They can't tolerate Bengalis, they can't tolerate Bengal people. वो साफ हो जाएगा बीजेपी बंगाल से।
जो इश्यूज फेस कर रहे हैं आज, रोजगार की बात हो या अपने सपने साकार करने की बात हो, उन सबको एक बल देने का काम ये बजट में उन्होंने किया है। बहुत सारा स्ट्रेस जॉब क्रिएशन पे, स्किलिंग पे, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पे, एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन पे, इंडस्ट्री को बढ़ावा देने के लिए, प्राइवेट सेक्टर को बढ़ावा देने के लिए, फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट को बढ़ावा देने के लिए, इस तरह के बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो आम आदमी को, आम नौजवान को रोजगार की तरफ आगे बढ़ाता है, उन सब चीज़ों के बारे में इन्होंने ध्यान दिया है। और ऊपर से आंध्रा की बात जब आती है तो उसके लिए तो मैं तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहूँगा नरेंद्र मोदी जी को, जिन्होंने एक वादा किया था कि आंध्रा की देखभाल हम करेंगे और उन्होंने आज किया है बजट के रूप में। जो कैपिटल की बात आती है, 5 साल जब जगन मोहन रेड्डी की सरकार आंध्रा में थी तो नो कैपिटल स्टेट कर दिया था। अमरावती को पूरी तरह से डिस्ट्रॉय कर दिया, वहाँ पे किसानों के साथ जो हमारी एक एग्रीमेंट थी उस सबको डिस्ट्रॉय कर दिया। तो उसको एक बल देने के लिए आज 15,000 करोड़ का पैकेज एक जो दिया हुआ है, उसके लिए हम अपने किसानों की तरफ से, स्टेट की तरफ से हम शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहेंगे। ये केवल एक बजट वाला इशू नहीं है, ये इमोशनल इशू है आंध्रा के लिए, उसको एक जगह मिला है आज बजट में। और पोलोवरम प्रोजेक्ट जो लाइफलाइन है आंध्रा के लिए, उसके बारे में भी उन्होंने बोला कि वो ऑन टाइम वो रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी के साथ कंप्लीट करेंगे, तो वो भी एक अच्छी बात है आंध्रा के लिए। और ऊपर से जो बैकवर्ड डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स हैं आंध्रा में, उसका भी एक मेंशन उन्होंने किया था कि वहाँ पे भी सेंट्रली स्पॉन्सर्ड स्कीम्स हो या फिर अलग तरीके के पैकेजेस हो, वो सब भी इम्प्लीमेंट करके वहाँ पे जो स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ लिविंग है वो हम आगे बढ़ाएंगे। वहाँ पे जो गरीब लोग हैं, अंत्योदय लोग हैं, उन सबको भी हम आगे बढ़ाएंगे। तो इस तरह की चीज़ें जब बोली जाती हैं बजट में, तो ज़रूर हमारे आंध्रा के लोग में या 5 करोड़ जो आंध्रा के लोग हैं उनमें एक विश्वास पैदा होता है कि चुनाव से पहले जो वादा किया था वो अब पूरा होने वाला है।
एक सवाल है सर, क्या आपको लगता है कि इस बजट से समाजवादी खुश है?
देखिए, जब तक किसान और नौजवानों के पक्की नौकरी का इंतजाम नहीं होगा तब तक कोई बड़ा लाभ नहीं पहुंचेगा जनता को।
आपको लगता है कि असेंबली चुनाव जब होने वाले हैं आगामी, उसमें ये बजट असर करेगा, इनकी नीतियां असर करेंगी?
स्वाभाविक है, क्योंकि सरकार जब चलती है सरकार के फैसलों से असर पड़ता है।
These are some of the backward areas which have been neglected by all the previous governments. Therefore, they are trying to bring in regional imbalances, to bring out into the balances into the regional imbalances. That's all, nothing more than that. Where employment, rural development, farm sector, manufacturing sector and service sector has due investment has been done. And this is a young Indian futuristic budget. This is a continuation of consultation and complementing the growth story of a Viksit Bharat of our beloved Narendra Modi ji.
मैं 10 में से इनको 0 ही दूंगी। ये जो पूरा मंशा थी इस बजट की, एक ही मंशा है, उसका टाइटल भी एक ही स्टेटमेंट कर दूंगी कि उसको नाम कर देना चाहिए प्रधानमंत्री सरकार बचाओ योजना। अलायंसेस ने आपसे मांग की थी कि आप उनको स्पेशल स्टेटस का दर्जा देंगे, आपने उनको झुंझुना पकड़ा दिया कि लिए लो आपके लिए 26,000 करोड़, 15,000 करोड़, ये वो फलाना ढिमका, उनको झुंझुना पकड़ाया गया। साथ ही साथ इर्द गिर्द जो पूरा उन्होंने बजट पेश किया है वो इसी सरकार को बचाने के हिसाब से किया है। बड़ी बड़ी बातें की हैं, पर ऑन ग्राउंड किसी तरीके से ना बेरोजगारी को लेकर कुछ एड्रेस किया है, ना युवाओं को लेकर एड्रेस किया है, अग्निवीर के बारे में कुछ नहीं डिसीजन किया बताया गया है, ना आपने महिलाओं के लिए कुछ किया, ना आपने रैशनलाइजेशन ऑफ टैक्सेस की बात की। आज जो आम जनता है वो इतना टैक्स पे करती है और जो कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स है उसमें आपने कमी कुछ मिला। सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट बात यही है कि 2 एलाइज को आपने खुश कर दिया। 2 एलाइज आपके साथ महाराष्ट्र में भी हैं। आज तक महाराष्ट्र को सिर्फ एक रिच स्टेट माना गया है जहाँ से टैक्स आप हमेशा खींचते रहोगे पर वापस उसके लिए कुछ नहीं दोगे। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर रिक्वायरमेंट्स महाराष्ट्र के भी हैं, क्यों महाराष्ट्र को बार बार दरकिनार किया जाता है? लानत तो इस बात की है कि ये 2 एलाइज अब तक चुप बैठे हैं सत्ता का मौज करने के लिए महाराष्ट्र में। उन्होंने एक बार नहीं कहा होगा हमारे महाराष्ट्र के लिए क्या।
और जो समस्याएं देश के लोगों के सामने हैं, बढ़ती हुई बेरोजगारी, बढ़ती हुई महंगाई, खास तौर पे फूड इन्फ्लेशन, ऐसे चीज़ों के बारे में उनको सही ढंग से जिस तरीके से एड्रेस करना चाहिए था वो नहीं हुआ। इस हालत में जो चाहिए था वो ये था कि खर्चा जो है सरकारी खर्चा वो बढ़ने की जगह सरकारी खर्चा जीडीपी के मुकाबले में अगर आप देखेंगे तो वो रेशियो जो एक्सपेंडिचर अपॉन एज परसेंटेज ऑफ जीडीपी वो घट रहा है। अब आपकी आमदनी बढ़ी है 14.5% और आपका खर्चा जो आप बढ़ा रहे हो वो है 5.9%। तो आमदनी इतनी ज़्यादा बढ़ी है और खर्चा इतना कम है उसके मुकाबले में। इसका मतलब क्या है कि इकोनॉमी और कॉन्ट्रैक्ट होगी, और कॉन्ट्रैक्ट होगी तो इसका मतलब है समस्याएं जनता की और बढ़ेगी। और इसके साथ तीसरा जो काफ़ी खतरनाक बात जो हुई है वो ये हुआ है कि सब्सिडीज़ जो है मुख्य रूप से वो उसके अंदर कटौती हुई है। फर्टिलाइज़र सब्सिडी में, फूड सब्सिडी में, आपके पेट्रोलियम सब्सिडी में, इन तीनों सब्सिडीज़ में आपका जो है कटौती हुई है पिछले साल के रिवाइज्ड एस्टिमेट्स के मुताबिक अगर आप देखेंगे। और सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि रोज़गार बढ़ाने के लिए जो योजना ये बनाए कि इंसेंटिव देंगे आप एम्प्लॉयर को, यानी 4 साल का आपका प्रोविडेंट फंड जो देना होगा वो एम्प्लॉयर को दिया जाएगा। अब इससे थोड़ी नौकरियां बढ़ेगी, एम्प्लॉयर को आप सब्सिडाइज कर रहे हो, यानी उसके मुनाफे बढ़ेंगे। अरे नौकरियां बढ़ाना है तो इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी को बढ़ाना पड़ेगा ना।
All right, those of course are some of the reactions that are coming in with respect to budget. Opposition they're of course not very happy with the fact that subsidies, some of the major subsidies for farmers including fertilizer subsidy, petroleum subsidy, there's been a reduction on those front, and the fact that for employment creation government has said that they will subsidize employers, and that hasn't really gone down well with some of the opposition voices. They're not very happy with budget, but that is of course anticipated, Krishna. It is expected.
Very difficult for one budget to please everybody, as they say. But then again, those are factors that the opposition will be harping upon. Another important factor is that we heard little to nothing about semiconductors in this budget, isn't it, Shweta?
Absolutely.
In fact, we have Mr. Ashok Chandak, President of India Electronics and Semiconductors Association, now joining us on this broadcast to help us understand that better. Ashok, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. I'm going to ask you a very simple, straightforward question. Were you satisfied with this budget?
Would say not fully satisfied, but at the same time, there are some announcement and provisions. Those are definitely going to help this particular sector. First one is the total outlay. They have increased to 21,900 crores now compared to the previous year, which is a 52% hike in terms of the allocation for this sector. Mighty. Number two, there is clearly a focus on the manufacturing, job creation, and MSMEs. So this is the area where even ISA has been asking for that, government should look at the funding aspect of creating the skilling and the talent development, because the industry is really at a growth path and wouldn't have enough the skilled manpower. So that's the stuff which is definitely going to benefit the semiconductor and electronics manufacturing, which is being planned in the country. At the same time, the third one, which is very important topic, is about the 1 lakh crore research fund, which was also indicated during the interim budget, is already mentioned today again. And we have already started to work as a ISA body, started to work on some 12 strategic research areas with several institutes to leverage this funding, as well as bringing the corporate funding as well, so that we take advantage of this and create the research and development and product creation into the country. So overall, I would call it is in a continuation of the previous policies and previous announcement. There is no path-breaking major change which is being done today, but overall, I would say it is still in the positive direction.
Okay. Mr. Chandak, what are you making of the BCD reduction on mobile phones, mobile PCB and mobile chargers to 15%? How is that likely to affect electronics manufacturing and, more importantly, giving some thrust to exports of electronics from India? India already accounts for about 3 to 4% of the total electronics export. That figure could just go up with this.
Yeah, I think India mobile manufacturing is already mature in terms of the manufacturing efficiencies are considered. Only challenge remained is about the value addition out of the country. And this BCD reduction, I don't think it is going to create any large scale import of the mobile phones, but it could help more on the export side actually as we go along. But actually along with this, there is also a discussions ongoing as a part of national policy on electronics, which is in discussion at MIT, to create more robust value addition opportunities and processes. So I am looking forward to that further step up to come up later on actually, because right now this NPE is in the discussion, not finalized yet. And with that NPE, our recommendation has been to create additional impetus and focus on a value addition so that we create more manufacturing, more jobs. And the support today with regards to that manufacturing aspect, skilling, MSME sector would also be in line with that actually.
All right. And
in addition, there is also a BCD topic on the telecom infrastructure manufacturing. So that is also going to benefit the local manufacturing of the telephone infrastructure, which is strategically important for the country. There's one point I want to bring out actually, which is not noticed by many people, if you allow me a minute.
Right.
So yesterday's economic survey did mention about the FDI from China to be encouraged. Rather than doing a trading, we could do FDI from China. That was mentioned. And today's speech, there is a mention of easing out the rules of the FDI. So if I put these two things together, maybe there is a initiative on card to get FDI from China, and my concern remains on this particular sector, that allowing blanket FDI into electronics semiconductor sector needs some kind of a cautious approach because the industry is just at the cusp of development. And by allowing the large scale FDIs, we may be limiting or killing the developing industry itself actually. So we need to be cautious on this. And we are in discussion. We are going to make the necessary inputs to the government on this topic.
All right. So what you're saying essentially is that if there is FDI allowed from China in electronics and semiconductor space, it would not augur well for our domestic manufacturing capability.
That is one. And second thing is also, on one side, we talk about the Atmanirbhar Bharat, and then you bring the foreign investment. That means foreign brands and foreign products. Nothing wrong. But then, please understand, any electronic products or semiconductor product, the maximum margin or profitability is about 40 to 50% by the brand and by the product. So if you bring the brand and the product both from outside of the technology, you have lost your profit margins actually. Number two, these components, once they are used in the defense and aerospace and telecom and other infrastructures, later on indirectly will be dependent on those brands. Those are China only, for example, doing manufacturing in the country. So we need to be very cautious on this.
Okay, what would you ideally like to see in this budget if I were to ask you that question?
I think we would have expected to have very clear spell out of the PLI for electronic components. The value addition norms should have been mentioned. But as I mentioned, maybe the NP is still in the discussion, so probably it may come out later. The biggest challenge for the country is to create the value addition. I mean, we talk about mobile manufacturing. It's good. It's nice. We are large, huge manufacturing, but if you look at the value addition in that, it's very limited. It's less than 20%. So 80% is not there. All the mobile phones, and second thing, you look at the India brands. Where are the electronics or semiconductor brands out of India? So we have been talking about to the government and the ministry and as well as MIT that we should encourage India product creation. We should encourage policies to create India brands. Because as I mentioned, 40 to 50% of the margin, gross margins, are into this branding and the product creations. So those are the things needs to be improvised further. Maybe it's not happened now, but it should happen very soon because we are still continuing that discussion. And it is in a long run in the interest of the country. You have the India products, the India IPRs, the India brands into this electronics and semiconductor space, which is missing.
Right, Ashok Chandak there, President of India Electronics and Semiconductor Association. Thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on this budget day, Ashok. Interesting observations coming in from the electronics industry.
Very interesting observation, of course, talking about value addition in electronics. And the expectation was that there'll be some clarity on PLI in electronics. That hasn't really come in. But, Ashok Chandak also mentioned that this will take time. Yep. It is a key priority area and something that they are discussing with Ministry of Finance. And you can't expect it all from the budget. It's a single day, it's a single set of document, but it does highlight government's key priority areas, and those priority areas are clear. They are going to be 9 things that this government will focus on. Let's quickly listen into them one by one.
I have 2 announcements to make for those opting for the new tax regime. First, the standard deduction for salaried employees is proposed to be increased from 50,000 to 75,000 rupees. Similarly, deduction on family pension for pensioners is proposed to be enhanced from 15,000 to 25,000 rupees. This will provide relief to about 4 crore salaried individuals and pensioners. Second, in the new tax regime, the tax rate structure is proposed to be revised as follows: 0 to 3 lakh rupees, nil; 3 to 7 lakh rupees, 5%; 7 to 10 lakh rupees, 10%; 10 to 12 lakh rupees, 15%; 12 to 15 lakh rupees, 20%; and above 15 lakh rupees, 30%. As a result of these changes, a salaried employee in the new tax regime stands to save up to 17,500 rupees in income tax. Apart from these, I am also making some other changes as given in the annexure. As a result of these proposals, revenue of about 37,000 crore, that is 29,000 crore in direct taxes and 8,000 crore in indirect taxes will be foregone, while revenue of about 30,000 crore rupees will be additionally mobilized. Thus, the total revenue foregone is about 7,000 crores annually. Debt recovery. Steps for reforming and strengthening debt recovery tribunals will be taken. Additional tribunals will be established to speed up recovery. Priority 5, urban development. Cities as growth hubs. Working with states, our government will facilitate development of cities as growth hubs. This will be achieved through economic and transit planning and orderly development of peri-urban areas utilizing town planning schemes. Priority 8, innovation, research and development. We will operationalize the Anusandhan National Research Fund for basic research and prototype development. Further, we will set up a mechanism for spurring private sector-driven research and innovation at commercial scale with a financing pool of 1 lakh crore rupees in line with the announcement in the interim budget. Space economy. With our continued emphasis on expanding the space economy by 5 times in the next 10 years, a venture capital fund of 1,000 crore rupees will be set up. Priority 9, next generation reforms. Economic policy framework. We will formulate an economic policy framework to delineate the overarching approach to economic development and set the scope of the next generation of reforms for facilitating employment opportunities and sustaining high growth. Our government will initiate and incentivize reforms for 1. Improving productivity of factors of production, and 2. Facilitating markets and sectors to become more efficient. These reforms will cover all factors of production, namely land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and technology as an enabler of improving total factor productivity and bridging inequality. Rural land-related actions will include 1. Assignment of unique land parcel identification number, UL PIN, or Bhu Aadhaar for all lands. 2. Digitization of cadastral maps. 3. Survey of subdivisions, survey of map subdivisions as per current ownership. 4. Establishment of land registry. And 5. Linking to the farmers registry. These actions will also facilitate credit flow and other agricultural services. Urban land-related actions. Land records in urban areas will be digitized with GIS mapping. An IT-based system for property record administration, updating, and tax administration will be established. These will also facilitate improving the financial position of urban local bodies. New airports, medical colleges, and sports infrastructure in Bihar will be constructed. An additional allocation to support capital investments will be provided. The requests of Bihar government for external assistance from multilateral development banks will be expedited.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी 9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
This is News 9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News 9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Hey, careful, huh? My daddy got it from abroad. Disaster! How will you pay for the loss now?
In stock market, you should take risk as per your capacity and knowledge. Trade in options very carefully.
Wow, Dikra! Absolutely perfect. Take risk with full understanding.
सोच कर, समझ कर, invest कर।
इस खेल में अब खेला होगा, हर नहले पे दहला होगा। टीम बड़ा है, स्टेज बड़ा है, पूरा भारत साथ खड़ा है। We are the Tigers, साथ खड़ा है। We are the Tigers, गेम बड़ा है। Dribble like a rap, pass, 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 setting up the trap, kick it hard in the ball, chuck, they football. Saturday football. Saturday football. Saturday football.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
Hey, careful, huh? My daddy got it from abroad. Disaster! How will you pay for the loss now?
In stock market, you should take risk as per your capacity and knowledge. Trade in options very carefully.
Wow, Dikra! Absolutely perfect. Take risk with full understanding.
सोच कर, समझ कर, invest कर।
इस खेल में अब खेला होगा, हर नहले पे दहला होगा। टीम बड़ा